Hi everyone, Michael here, and welcome to our first online sermons as we enter the coronavirus lockdown. And I hope everyone's doing okay and not going too crazy yet. It's been a while since we've caught up in person, and this is feeling pretty weird, sort of reaching to my computer screen, but we'll give it a shot and see how it goes. So today's reading is from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 31. And God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So we've been going through this series for the last little while, called The Other 6 Days. And the focus has been on what life should look like for our sort of Monday to Saturdays, a normal life. And for me, it's a topic that's really closely related to questions of purpose. What are we here for? What should we be doing? All those simple questions. What's the meaning of life? That kind of thing. No promises to really fully answer that here. But those sort of questions, they always stress me out when I start thinking about it too much. This world is a confusing and pretty crappy place at times, but apparently God's in control, and it's no accident that we're here. So I'm not claiming to have figured it all out, and as you will have noticed throughout this series, we've been talking a lot about our God-given mission, about being ambassadors, being God's representatives. And when we look at that first part of Genesis that we just read, it actually tells us a lot. Maybe not so much to us at first glance, but definitely to those who it was written to. It told them about God's intentions for mankind, what he made them for, what they're here for, what's our purpose. So that's what we're going to focus on today. It's essentially the same message we've been saying the last few weeks. It's just a different angle on it, unpacking different implications of that. So in Sarah's last message, she mentioned that the creation story from Genesis was written down for the Israelites during the time of the Exodus. So they were in the wilderness after escaping from Egypt, and they were given a different story about creation of the world and everything in it. It's a different story from the Egyptian story that they've been told, from the world that they came out of. And that story was that the world and everything in it came from chaos, that it was unintentional, whereas the Genesis story says that God made creation and mankind in it. He knew what he was doing, and he even says it was good. But the bit that I want to unpack a bit more is that line, "God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them." That word used for image, I'm not going to try and pronounce the Hebrew for that, but it shows up in a number of places. There's lots of examples that use the exact same context as that one, that man is made in the image of God, and we'll come back to that soon. But I'll look at some of these other examples to broaden our view of what that word means. So here in Leviticus 26 verse 1, it says, "Do not make idols or set up carved images or sacred pillars or sculptured stones in your land, that you may worship them. I am the Lord your God." So there's lots of similar uses like this one here found a number of times throughout the Old Testament, and they're all in the context of idols and worshipping false gods. So when we look at images in the ancient world, images in relation to idols here, these idols, they were quite a normal thing in the world that they lived in. They've been found all over North Africa, Middle East, Europe, Asia, all over the place at that time. And people would make images or idols of things, God of the sun, moon, sky, sea, animals, fertility, seasons, that sort of thing, and then they would worship them and pray to them. Sometimes they wouldn't actually make the images, but they'd still worship the creation rather than the creator. What's interesting in that Genesis account is that this story stands in opposition to this behavior that had been going on. That Genesis account refutes the belief of the others at that time, saying that these things are not gods, that actually God created all those things. So in the ancient world, they often placed idols like this in temples, and it was thought that the idol would manifest the presence of God. And sometimes others would place idols as mediators between God and man. So with that in mind, there's a few Bible stories that start making a bit more sense. In particular, the Israelites building that golden calf after Moses went up the mountain. It makes a bit more sense in this context. It reads really strange to our ears. God's rescued them. It does all these amazing things. Then Moses climbs a mountain and disappears for a bit, and now all of a sudden there's no sign of God. And the very next thing we read is, oh, hey, let's make a golden calf. It's very unusual next thing to have happen. Doesn't make sense to our brains. But the culture that they're in, it makes a bit more sense. What they're trying to do was to get God to come back, trying to manifest the presence of God. So that's just another example of that word image. We're made in God's image. People made images of things and worship them. There's two different ideas there. And another example I want to look at where this word is used is in a pretty similar context to that of the idols, but it's a little bit more of a face value sort of example. And that would be images in the ancient world, talking things of statues or carvings, that sort of thing. So examples of this would be when kings or rulers would set up images of themselves to remind people of their rule. So this might be the carvings on the wall or statues in a public place, or maybe their face on the coins. You might remember that story when Jesus was asked about paying tax, and he replied by asking, whose image is on the coin? The response being Caesar. Then give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. So that word there, whose image is on the coin, it's that same images that we're looking at in the idols examples and in the made in the image of God example that we started with. And sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap with this example and the idols, where they would make these images of the kings and expect people to bow down and worship them. But generally speaking, they were for a different purpose than the idols. These images were more like reminders. They're a bit like propaganda. It might have been to remind people, look at all the cool things that I've done. I've built this castle, defeated that nation. Remember what I've done for you and how amazing I am. Or also as reminders to obey and don't cause trouble. Remember how I smashed everyone. Don't mess with me. I'm in charge. That kind of thing. These were images that were made to send a message. So we see that word images has been used in the context of mankind created in God's image, and in the context of don't create images of things and worship them, in reference to idols. And lastly, that people use images to send messages, a face on a coin, carving on a wall, that kind of thing. And I plan to do a bit of an interactive exercise here, but due to this sort of lockdown and remote working, it's not really going to work quite as I intended. Needs a bit of audience participation. So I'm expecting all of you listening to start talking to your phone or computer and respond as you would as if we were live. So we'll give it a shot, see how it works. It'll sound weird you talking to your phones, but from my perspective, I'm talking to my computer and not hearing a response, so I promise it's weirder for me than it is you. So this is actually an example from one of my first lectures at Wintec. I studied media arts, and our first assignment was all about symbols and images and that kind of thing. So yeah, let's see how we go. So if I asked you, what is this? And if you talked out loud just now, then thank you for that. If I could hear you, I bet you probably would have said smiley face or happy face or something like that. But that's actually not the right answer. You're thinking too much. That's not a smiley face. It's actually just a bit of a yellow circle with a bit of black markings on it. What we're looking at here is actually a representation of a smiley face. It's not really a smiley face, is it? Let's try another one. What's this? And now, depending how fast you've called on, some of you might be calling out maybe Abraham Lincoln, but actually, no, not quite. This is a carved statue of Abraham Lincoln. Let's try one more. What is this? And if you knew the person in that photo, you might be saying that that's Becca. And if you don't know her, then you might say that's just some weird lady in penguin pajamas. But that's also not quite right either. This isn't a photo of Becca. This is actually a photo of Becca. It's not Becca herself, you know. It's just an image of her. If I wanted to be really annoying, I'd say that it's a collection of pixels arranged in a way that looks like Becca. It's not really her. And I hope you're feeling really enlightened right now. So I took a student loan out to learn this kind of stuff. You guys getting it for free, so there you go. So these are images or symbols. They represent the thing that they're imaging. They're not the thing itself. They are created in the likeness of something. It sounds very profound, but it's very simple, isn't it? And we use symbols and images all the time. We do know how to read them. You know, that smiley face, it's a round symbol with a few circles and a curved line. Yet from that, we know what it represents. You know, happy, cheerful, good. It has lots of implied meaning to it, more than just yellow and black dots. We know how to read symbols and their meanings. You know, we've got this whole section of emojis that we can use in text without writing any words, and people know what it is you're saying or what you're meaning. At the most simplest level, the point of an image is to portray the thing that it is imaging. You know, a statue or a photo or a drawing of someone is there to show you what they look like. The point of creating an image is to resemble the thing that you're trying to portray and to show it to others. So when we ask that question, you know, why did God create man? That's a big and scary and complicated question, especially when we phrase it like that. But if we rearrange it and if we ask ourselves something slightly different, if we said, why did God create images of himself? Well, that's a little bit easier. You know, why do we create images of anything? We create images to portray the thing we are trying to image. So why did God create images of himself? To image God, to show himself, to be a resemblance, to show something like him. So that people would look at humans, the way we behave, think, feel. So people in all of creation could see that God in us or through us. That's why God created mankind. In that same chapter where it talks about creating mankind in God's image, it also says why he created them. You know, let them have dominion, be fruitful, replenish and subdue the earth. Being created in the image of God goes hand in hand with what mankind is expected to do, what they are here for. So all of this points to viewing the image in a functional sense. And what I mean by that is that, you know, we are created to image God by what we do, which I think also means that we can fail to image God the way we should. You know, that's what our prayers of confession are saying each week. You know, forgive us for the wrong we have done, for the good we have not done, where we have failed to live up to your name, where we have failed to image you. You know, Genesis goes on to give instructions of how to image God, you know, like caring for creation, loving our neighbours, being a light to the nations. We're meant to image God in our actions, and it makes sense to think of imaging God as a verb, you know, as a doing word. Let us create humankind in our image would be more understood as let us create humankind to be our imager. We don't read, you know, God created mankind in his image to be statues that do nothing and just kind of look like God. That whenever the animals and other people looked at them, they would know that God has arms and legs. Yeah, I don't think that was the point of it. You know, the point of it was that it would be an image and a symbol that it was meant to represent more than physical likeness. In the same way that that yellow circle with some dots and a curved line represents a happy face, you know, and all the good things associated with that. The primary purpose of this icon is to portray meaning or messages, not physical likeness. If you look at the face of the person next to you, and you'll notice there's hardly any resemblance to an actual smiling human face and this icon. You know, people don't look like this, and yet we know that it means a happy, smiling face. You may have heard that saying, to err is human. We all make mistakes. That's how we are. And while that's true, we're not human because we sin. We're actually less human when we sin. We will be more human when we sin no more. Humans were designed to be images of God, and when we sin, we're not living up to that. Perhaps a more accurate quote will be the words of Irenaeus, the glory of God is man fully alive. Not man all the time, not mankind when we are sinful and destructive, but when mankind is truly imaging God as we were designed, bringing his presence, his rule, his love, mercy, compassion to earth. That is the glory of God. Being made in the image of God is a mission and a responsibility. Another way of saying what we've been talking about this whole series, we are his ambassadors, here to represent his interest to the rest of creation. And maybe you're sort of sick of hearing that. We've been focusing on that idea for a while now. But as I mentioned at the start, this isn't just some, random side topic that's kind of interesting to know. This answers big questions about our purpose, about the point of our existence, what we're designed for. I do at times sort of think too much and struggle with anxiety and feelings of hopelessness. Often that everything seems pointless, and I know I'm not the only one. And I think a lot of this anxiety comes from seeing and experiencing the scrappy world and wondering, what the heck am I supposed to do about this? Or normally phrased as, what should I do? What's my purpose in life? What is God's purpose for me? If we look at the Bible, there are some examples where people get specific revelation. Abraham was told, go here, do this, become a nation. David, you will be king. Or Moses, set my people free. Those were some examples of people who got very specific tasks given to them from God. And I can't even count the number of times that I've prayed things like, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Or, here I am, send me. I'll do whatever you want, just tell me, make it obvious. And some people get that, but I haven't. Most people I know haven't either. So what is God's purpose for me? Every time I phrase the question like this, it's like instant anxiety. I have no idea what I'm doing. I haven't heard an audible voice from God. Something must be wrong, Should I have been a doctor instead of a website designer? Or was I meant to take that other job instead of this one? Start freaking out, wondering if you've done the right thing or the wrong thing. I remember this being extra bad when I was looking at leaving school and trying to decide what to do next. That's a stressful enough time as it is, without adding the extra pressure of trying to figure out if it's your purpose, if I felt called to do it, if God wanted me to be studying this or that, or working in this or that. And obviously, if you've had some revelation or feel called to something in particular, I'm not telling you to ignore that. I'm just saying, don't freak out if you don't get that, because it seems like a lot of people don't. And when we look in the Bible for specific revelation about what an individual should do, we can find some examples, but those are sort of scarcely given, and their purpose is given to those people, not to us. I'm not called to be the king of Israel like David was. I'm not called to set Israel free from the Egyptians like Moses. Those aren't instructions for me or you or humanity in general. That was to specific people. But that call to be an ambassador applies to every human, to live the way that we were designed, to be images of God, to be symbols that reflect God's goodness. There are plenty of instructions we can find that apply to all humans relating to what we were designed for, all about our purpose. So what is God's purpose for me? Again, instant anxiety when I have that question phrased like that. One thing that I find quite helpful is to just change one word in there, and if I rearrange that to say, what is God's will for me? It's still saying the same thing as previously, but now I can sort of think about it without freaking out and feeling like I'm doing something wrong or have to make the right choice. So we might not each get a specific individual calling, but that doesn't mean that God isn't telling us how to live our lives. There's plenty of instruction about how we should be generous, to love our neighbour, love God, and so on. These are the general list of things that are part of God's will for us. If you're a doctor, if you're a student or a stay-at-home parent, that's great. Do those things while loving your neighbour and loving God. I mentioned in the past that I like lists and tick boxes. If I know what I'm meant to do, then I can do it right. It's much simpler than just assuming. Um, but as frustrating and scary as it is to not get a specific list of steps laid out in front of us, it also brings us a lot of freedom. My wife reminds me of an illustration that's really helpful, that God has put us on a playground rather than a narrow path. So there's a general instruction there, go play on the playground. There's freedom to go on the slide or the swing or the monkey bars or whatever, but don't go outside those boundaries. The road is not the playground. The swimming pool's not the playground. Given generic rules and instructions that provide a range of options, rather than a narrow path with every step marked out for us. God's not telling us, take the third right, go 300 meters, take a left, that sort of thing. We've been given generic instructions in our calling and purpose. So what's the point of all this? What are we meant to be doing? And it seems that the answer isn't going to be found in something that we need to achieve in our lifetime. We look for that definitive answer, that box to tick, that thing to do. But it's more about the journey than that destination. I'm reminded of something we did at youth group years ago. There was that WWJD craze. What would Jesus do? I'm not sure if anyone remembers that or still has those bracelets. At the time I thought it was a pretty lame thing, but I was a moody teenager back then. But this is actually, looking back on it, probably the most practical and useful answer I've found. What would Jesus do? So when we look at Jesus, we see him loving people, loving God, looking after the poor, the sick, calling out hypocrisy and injustice. He fulfilled the design humans were intended to do. Adam and Eve fell short, and so did Israel, so do we, but not Jesus. Romans 8, verse 29 says, "For whom he did foreknow, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." Paul says something similar again in 2 Corinthians, that we are changed into the same image as Jesus. And Paul's making this obvious to us, that mankind was meant to image God, and we've never fully done that. He's making it clear that Jesus did, and by telling us to be Christ-like, to be conformed to the image of his Son, is another way of saying, live the way you were designed to live. Be like Jesus. He's your practical example. Follow him. Be loving. Be generous. Look after each other. Look after creation. Be creative. Be caring. Do all these great things. Be like God. Do the things that God is doing. Mankind was created with the intention that when you looked at another human, it would be a symbol of good things, of a loving God who cares about his creation. Mankind was meant to represent God. Like when you look at the statue of Abraham Lincoln, at a surface level, it's just some guy, carved out of stone. But when you dwell on it, you get to know the story, it shows you so much more than that. It's a symbol of freedom, abolishing of slavery, there's pride there, faith in humanity. It's just a stone carving, but it represents so much more than that. And that's the calling of mankind. If we always did what we should do, it would be impossible to look at another human being and not be thinking, God is good. That should be the instant message. Like looking at that smiley face symbol, without even thinking about it, our minds are taken to words like happy, fun, good, that sort of thing. We were created to image God. We're meant to be God to others in all situations. When we forgive those who have wronged us, we're showing the character of God. When we give to those in need, we are showing God's love. Those videos that float around on the internet, faith in humanity restored, and it's something like, people untangling a seal from a fishing net or saving a dog stuck in a river, that sort of thing. That's humans looking after creation. God cares about that too. We're created to be images of God, and that's an active thing. That's missional. That's our purpose as ambassadors. And that can seem like, quite a far away and unhelpful thing sometimes. It doesn't always speak to where we are right now, what we're facing today or this week. And again, I think a good way to help us focusing on that to bring it into our daily lives and to make it relatable and not instantly, cause anxiety in us. The way to do that is to look at our example, to ask that question, what would Jesus do? We're in a unique time at the moment. The time of this recording, most of our country is in lockdown. If you're stuck at home with the kids, or alone, or in a flat, or if you're someone working at a hospital or a supermarket, one of those things keeping the rest of us alive, wherever you are, whatever your situation these next few weeks, it's probably quite likely that you're going to be having feelings of frustration, anxiety, anger, all those sorts of fun times ahead. But in those times, that's where that little WWJD, what would Jesus do? That phrase can be really helpful to us. Right now, in my current situation, what would Jesus do? So I'll end with that reminder again. What would Jesus do? How can we be more Christ-like in every situation? And that's a reminder to change our focus back to our mission and what we were here to do. We're here to focus on the journey, not the destination. Our goal is not to get through this lockdown period and then start being God's ambassadors. We're here for the journey, to be images of God during this time, despite what goes on.